Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you're stepping into the shadowed heart of Renaissance Prague, a city of cold stone corridors, flickering torchlight, and restless ambition. The furnaces burn late, the scholars whisper theories thin as smoke, and you're not a famed sage or royal favourite, just a weary court alchemist, drifting through a castle that asks for miracles you were never meant to perform. Before we start, do me one small favour. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you'd prefer these stories without ads, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you want the ultimate immersive experience, consider using a pair of wireless earbuds. They're comfortable, discreet and designed so you can wear them even while sleeping. I've linked my favourite pair, plus other sleep tools, in the description. Now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You arrive in Prague before dawn, long before the city remembers to wake. The air is cool enough to quiet your breath, carrying a soft trace of smoke from the riverbank fires that never fully go out. A thick veil of fog drapes itself across the narrow streets, moving slowly, as if the entire city is exhaling in its sleep. You stand still for a moment, letting the mist cling to your sleeves and settle in your hair, and you feel as though you have stepped into a place that is older than its own memory. The stones beneath your feet are slick from the night's moisture, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Pilgrims, merchants, scholars, drifters, and dreamers who once believed they had something new to offer the world. You follow their path now, though you sense they all learn the same quiet truth in the end. Prague absorbs ambition the way fog absorbs light, turning every bright hope into a muted glow. You walk without hurry. The silence encourages it. Even the river below seems to move more gently. At this hour, its surface barely stirring as it fades beneath the fog. Lanterns hang from wooden posts, dimmed to small halos of gold that struggle to carve any clarity out of the grey air. Each flame trembles as if thinking of going out, but none dare to. The city has always liked its shadows. An old baker opens a door near you, releasing a puff of warm air that smells faintly of rye and wood ash. He doesn't see you. He moves like someone who has repeated this ritual for decades, placing logs on coals, humming softly to himself. You watch him for a moment, feeling the calm weight of routine settle around you. There is comfort in seeing someone who does not expect miracles from the world. You wish you could say the same for yourself. As you continue walking, the buildings begin to rise taller, leaning inward the way old friends do when sharing secrets. Their wooden beams creak softly. Their small windows reflect nothing but the fog, making them look blind and dreaming. You can hear droplets of water falling from the tiled rooftops, collecting into little streams that follow the slope of the street. Each sound is gentle, rhythmic, almost musical, as if the city itself is trying to lull you into its own pace. You pass under an archway carved with symbols you half recognize: lion heads, floral knots, hints of saints and emperors. Prague likes to mix faith and folklore together, until even historians argue about what half the carvings mean. You suspect the city finds this amusing. It has always encouraged people to feel as though they are on the edge of some great revelation, only to reveal that revelation was a misunderstanding dressed in grandeur. Ahead of you, the castle rises, still distant but unmistakable. Its silhouette sits on the hill, like a cluster of dark shapes floating above the fog, almost unreal in the pale light. Even from here, you sense the pull of it. Not its beauty, not its power, but its expectations. Stones that old carry a quiet authority. They seem to whisper that anyone who enters must prove their worth or be swallowed by their shadows. You step onto the Charles Bridge, where statues loom on either side. Their faces, softened by centuries of weather, watch you with the expressionless calm of witnesses who have seen far stranger things than a lone traveller at dawn. The bridge beneath you is broad and still, its stones holding the night's chill. The river flows below, whispering against its pillars. You lean your hands on the rough surface of the parapet and feel its grain beneath your fingertips, cool and solid. The fog parts slightly, revealing a faint glimmer on the water, just enough to remind you there is a world beneath the silence. A fisherman stands at the far end, motionless, his line disappearing into the water with the kind of patience you have always envied. He does not once look up, he simply exists, unbothered by things he cannot control. You wonder briefly what might happen if you tried to adopt that mindset, but you carry something heavier than patience. The knowledge that someone in the castle believes you can turn one metal into another, or turn ambition into brilliance, or turn his restless dreams into something he can touch. The wind shifts slightly, carrying with it a hint of incense from a chapel hidden somewhere in the fog. Bells strike once, very softly. An early morning chime meant for monks who never truly sleep. The sound drifts across the river, gentle and thin, as though travelling too far would exhaust it. You listen, letting it settle inside you, like the last ripple in a pool. As you reach the far side of the bridge, the fog begins to thin, revealing more of the city's shape. Rooftops tile upward in uneven rows. Narrow alleys split off at odd angles, like veins leading toward forgotten corners. Prague is a maze by design. The city never liked anything too simple. It prefers mystery, even when mystery creates its own inconvenience. Every turn seems to promise revelation, only to lead to another quiet street with shuttered windows and a cat watching from a ledge. You move deeper into the heart of the old town, where the cobblestones shift under your boots. A faint murmur begins to rise from the houses, rustling fabric, a cough, a door creaking open. Morning is stretching its limbs slowly, without urgency. This city does not rush until noon, and even then, only reluctantly. A woman sweeps the front of her doorway, her broom brushing gently over the stones. She nods to you with the polite indifference of someone who has seen too many travellers carrying too many hopes. In her eyes you catch a reflection of the same fog that surrounds you. It makes her look part of the city itself, woven into the quiet architecture of its mornings. You feel a hesitant sense of belonging in that shared stillness. An apothecary shop stands nearby, its shutters open just enough to let you glimpse shelves crowded with jars. Dried herbs hang from the ceiling like brittle ornaments. You smell lavender, wormwood, cedar, and something bitter you cannot name. The scent is oddly soothing, reminding you of your own tools waiting somewhere ahead. Glass vessels, powders, metals that resist your desires, and the quiet sting of Mercury. The thought brushes your mind like a cold fingertip, but it does not linger. Not yet. Your path slopes gently upward as the castle draws nearer. Even at this early hour, the guards outside the lower gate stand rigid, armoured shapes half swallowed by fog. Their breath forms pale clouds, merging with the mist around them. You approach slowly, taking in the worn lines of their helmets, the slight dents on their breastplates, the way their hands rest on spears with the ease of long practice. They look both imposing and tired, men accustomed to watching a world that rarely changes, no matter how many kings convince themselves otherwise. One of them nods at you, offering permission to pass. Not warmth, not curiosity, just acknowledgement. You step through the gate, hearing the soft scrape of metal shifting behind you. The courtyard beyond is empty, save for a stray dog curled against a wall, asleep in a patch of lingering warmth from last night's ovens. Its ears twitch slightly at your footsteps, but it remains nestled, undisturbed. You pause in the centre of the courtyard, looking up at the castle looming above you. The towers disappear into the thinning fog, their outlines blurred like sketches unfinished by a distracted artist. There is a peculiar beauty in their imperfection. You feel as though you're standing inside a painting that has not fully decided what it wants to depict. For a moment you allow yourself to breathe deeply, drawing in air that tastes faintly of stone, smoke, and something metallic you cannot quite identify. Prague always carries a hint of metal in the air, as though reminding its inhabitants that transformation, true transformation, rarely comes easily. The sun begins to rise, barely visible through the lingering grey. Its light spreads slowly across the rooftops, touching them with a pale, uncertain gold. Not the gold your new patron dreams of, a softer one, a more honest one. You stand there, letting the morning settle over you like a thin blanket, and as the city awakens around you, you sense, quietly, undeniably, that this place will demand more of you than you expect, not loudly, not cruelly, just insistently, the way fog demands shape from everything it touches. Your journey has only begun, but already you feel the weight of a city that believes greatness lies just around the corner, even when that corner leads only to another fog-draped street. The gate closes behind you with the quiet finality of a book being shut. The scrape of iron muffles into the courtyard's breath, and the air inside the walls is different. Enclosed, warmed by hearths you cannot yet see, perfumed faintly with oil and ink, and the unhurried sweat of men who spend their days thinking. A guide in a plain cloak meets you at the threshold and falls into step beside you without ceremony. He walks as if through well-mapped halls, shoulders relaxed, eyes practiced in reading the slight shifts of a castle's mood. You follow him, feeling the stones change beneath your boots, as you move farther from the city's fog and deeper into a place that keeps its own weather. An antechamber opens like a pocket of silence. Tapestries hang from the walls, their threads dulled by time, but still stitched with stories of hunts and saints. Candles stand in brackets, their flames steady and indifferent. A table holds a tray of wine, cherries bobbing in the dark liquid, the scent faint and sweet. Someone has thought to make comfort small and precise here. You take a breath and taste the faint tang of it. Iron and oak and the faintest suggestion of something perfumed, like a memory of spring. You are shown to a smaller room first, a place where petitioners wait, and where minds ready themselves for the soft gravity of the ruler's presence. Its window looks out over the gardens. In the emptiness beyond the glass, shape and shadow form a private world of clipped hedges and a single statue, frost-kissed and ancient. A page brings a basin with warm water and a cloth. You wash your palms and feel the soap slip over your skin. It is a small ritual that smooths the edges of you, an attempt to make your hands less like tools and more like instruments of trust. When you are finally led through the inner doors, the castle seems to rearrange itself to accommodate the quiet that follows. The ruler does not announce himself with trumpets or the clang of armour. He prefers a gentleness that feels designed to disarm, not because he lacks force, but because he would have his authority survive as a whisper rather than a shout. You enter a chamber where light pools from a high window and falls across rugs threaded with silver and dull gold. He sits in a chair of plain wood, unadorned enough that the presence of his person becomes the ornament. He looks up when you come in, and his face bears the calm of a man who has long practiced soft commands. When he speaks, his voice is lower than you expect, and steady enough to hold the room in its orbit. His words come like someone setting down a cup with care. He seems to savour their shape. He tells you almost immediately about gold, not in the quick greed of a merchant counting coins, but with the hushed reverence of someone describing a sacred text. He speaks of gold as if it were a language that once understood could make the world obedient. You listen while he speaks of more than metal. He talks of longevity with the same delicate, loving cadence, folding the possibility of years into his sentences as if it were an offering. Immortality, he says, is not for the frivolous. It is for those who will sit patiently at the edge of knowledge until the knowledge bends. He speaks of miracles the way others speak of weather, inevitable, divisible, something you can learn to forecast. Each idea arrives soft, and almost tender, and there is a temptation to believe in them simply because of the care with which they are described. There is a warmth in his attention that disorients. Praise is rarely lavish or loud here. Instead, it is measured, persistent. He asks about your methods with the interest of a man who delights in process. He asks about Mercury as if it were a confidant, about furnaces as if they were capable of receiving confidences. You tell him about your small successes and the much larger number of failures, and he nods as though these failures are footnotes to a grand foot race already decided. It comforts him to hear of your efforts, and for a moment you feel seen in a way that is unfamiliar and strangely flattering. But his softness holds a weight that does not relent. When he leans forward, the light catches the edge of his hand and makes it look almost fragile, the illusion of tenderness covering something firm and unbending. His expectations do not shout. There is no angry demand. Rather, they settle like a second cloak about your shoulders, woven from the fine threads of hope and insistence. You sense, without being told, that the currency here is not merely results, but the performance of faith in possibility. Your head bends naturally to that gravity. You are given a small cabinet of instruments, each piece polished and labelled in a script so neat it looks like calligraphy rather than notation. Hammers, crucibles, flasks with stoppers that keep secrets safe. They sit in their prescribed places like a row of waiting attendants. A younger courtier shows you how to read the ruler's marginal notes, soft admonitions in the margins of experiments, suggestions that read less like advice and more like petitions. The paper smells faintly of smoke and oil, a scent that will come to live in your memory, alongside Mercury's metallic stench. He asks you to demonstrate, gently, a practice you have only performed in private. You approach the furnace with a careful pride in your steps. The task he requests is small to the eye, but heavy with implication. Coax impurity from base metal and show that temper can be altered. You light the bellows and watch the flame catch, warming your face. The heat is honest, a companion that offers immediate, elemental truth. You work with the patient rhythm of someone who has learned the language of heat, and resistance, liquid metal, moves in the crucible, like a second, smaller sun. It flares and calms as your hands find the pace. While you work, the ruler watches with an expression that keeps emotions tucked behind a polite smile. It is a look that suggests he has invested more than his curiosity. There is real hope in the small furrow at the corner of his mouth. His gaze moves over the instruments, then to your hands, then to the vessel that holds the metal. You feel the pressure of expectation in the space between each of his breaths. Each careful adjustment you make is an answer to an unspoken question. The room listens. Even the curtains seem to lean in. When the demonstration ends, no trumpet sounds, and no proclamation follows. Instead, the ruler inclines his head and speaks in a tone that could be consolation or command. He praises the method, the attention, the patience. He praises the art of wanting the impossible to be probable. Then he speaks of urgency without using the word. He mentions time, as though it were a thin book on his table, one he would like you to read faster. There is a hint of impatience there, softened by the velvet of his words. It is not harsh, but it is relentless in its insistence. You understand, in the way you understand the pressure of a lid fitted too tightly, that his desires will require more than careful experiments. They will require spectacles when they help, plausible narratives when they do not, and a daily demonstration of loyalty that might ask you to perform acts you would otherwise keep hidden. He surrounds hope with etiquette and expects you to wrap your failures in explanations so artful that they resemble success. As you leave the chamber, the world outside feels slightly altered. The air in the corridor tastes the way a bell tastes after being struck. Resonant and slow to settle, courtiers pass you with practiced smiles and eyes that catch yours and hold information on their tongues until later. The castle is alive with a patient insistence. People here do not shout for attention. They cultivate a quiet that presses like a hand to your shoulder. You feel it, the way in which a ruler's calm can become an instrument of pressure. Back in your small room, you sit by a simple table and unwrap a parcel of your own tools. The mercury in its vial glints under candlelight, liquid and conspiratorial. You place the vial down and run the pad of your thumb along the glass, feeling the cool smoothness. The metal seems to sleep in its vessel, but you know better. Mercury remembers the heat of your hands. You begin to plan with the careful deliberation of someone who must hedge both science and language. The ruler's expectations are not merely about discovering a secret. They are about embodying the illusion that secrets are always within reach. There is a peculiar tenderness in this demand. It flirts with the romantic, the idea that a single, tenacious person could change the alchemy of a court, while quietly asking you to trade parts of yourself for the trade pride for patience, truth for plausible stories, nights awake for the ruler's slow comfort. The transactions are almost charming when described in hushed terms, until you remember how often charm is the velvet glove that hides calloused hands. Sleep does not come easily when hope and obligation nest together in your chest. You lie awake for a while, listening to the distant clink of metal, the whisper of pages turning, the soft step of a guard on patrol. The castle hums with the low rhythm of people keeping watch, each breath a small promise to maintain the balance of expectation and provision. Outside, the city exhales and inhales in fog and river song, unchanged by the tenderness and the demands within. You think of the ruler as you finally drift, not as an enemy, nor as a fool, but as someone who sincerely believes he can bend nature into terms he prefers. There is a strange sympathy in that. You find it easier to forgive the soft tyranny of expectation than to be surprised by it. Yet, even as you forgive, you catalogue what will be necessary. More heat, more careful words, a steadier hand, and a willingness to present half success as a step toward the whole. The night stretches around the castle like a cloak. In its folds you feel both the comfort of being chosen and the weight of being required. The ruler sleeps somewhere behind thick walls, perhaps dreaming of gold that does not tarnish and years that do not diminish. You imagine his dream as a small bright thing he carries like a candle, and you wonder how long you will be asked to hold it aloft. The question is not urgent yet. It will arrive with the slow certainty of dawn. For now, you breathe in the warm, faintly metallic air of the room, and you let the calm do its patient work. Tomorrow, the furnace will call. Tomorrow, you will answer. You rise before the sun has committed to the sky, following a corridor that curves like a long breath held by the stone. The air cools as you descend, each step taking you farther from the realm of tapestries and polished language, and deeper into the place where the castle keeps its less presentable ambitions. A lantern swings gently from your hand, its small circle of gold brushing the walls and revealing scratches left by years of people carrying tools heavier than yours. The scent of oil grows thicker, the stone grows damp, and then, like the hush that follows a confession, you reach the door. Your laboratory waits behind it, half awake, as though it has been monitoring the night just as you have. When you push the door open, a breath of air escapes, metallic, sharp, familiar. It wraps itself around your throat with the faintest sting. Copper pots sit in rows like tired soldiers, some dented from old experiments, others polished to a quiet glow. Glass vessels line the wooden shelves, each piece bearing a small flaw, a crack, a chip, a bubble trapped forever in its surface. They are imperfect companions for an imperfect craft, and yet you find yourself greeting them with a small nod, the way one acknowledges tools that know too many secrets. The floor creaks under your boots, dust gathering in the seams. Someone once swept this room with a discipline that bordered on devotion. Now its corners hold grains of metal and forgotten herbs. You move to the workbench, touching its surface with a kind of tenderness. It is stained with rings of old spills, rings made by liquids too unstable to behave predictably. Rings made by your own impatient hands on nights when you were certain clarity was only a breath away. Your furnace sits against the far wall, its mouth dark and quiet for now. The iron grate bears the marks of repeated heating, small distortions that make it look like a face permanently twisted in expectation. You open it and breathe in a scent that clings to memory. The shadow of burned charcoal, the warmth of long-cooled embers, the faint taste of mercury that seems to rise even when the room is still. The metallic tang meets your tongue before you speak a word. It is difficult to explain how a place can feel both sacred and weary. The laboratory manages it easily. Every corner of the room hums with a kind of restrained possibility, as if the air itself is waiting to see whether you will perform brilliance or folly. And yet beneath that hum sits a deeper truth. The understanding that most of what will happen here today will not resemble triumph. Smoke will rise where clarity should form. Mixtures will turn the wrong colour at the wrong moment. Glass will fracture unexpectedly. The world rarely transforms because a person wills it to. You set your materials on the bench, aligning them out of habit. Containers of powders that shift like sand. Small stones shaped by rivers, older than the castle walls. Thin sheets of metal that reflect your face in a warped sheen. Mercury sits in its vial at the centre of the arrangement. You lift it gently, watching the liquid pool and rolls in a single shining mass. It looks alive, curious, restless, ready to slip through your fingers if given the slightest excuse. With your sleeve pulled over your mouth, you begin to heat the first vessel. Flame spreads slowly, blooming at the base of the crucible. The metal warms beneath your hands, the fire crackles with a subdued hunger, and you wonder, as you often do, how many nights will look exactly like this. The rhythm is so familiar that your body moves before your thoughts do. Mixing, measuring, tapping the side of a cup with 2 fingers to coax a stubborn grain to fall. The soundscape becomes its own kind of comfort, the faint hiss of something volatile touching heat, the soft pop of a glass bead adjusting to temperature, the muted clink of metal instruments returning to their place. Even the scratch of your quill, as you record measurements, feels like part of a larger composition, one the castle never hears, though it leans on the outcome. You pause for water, lifting a cup to your lips and immediately regretting it. The metallic taste clings to your tongue again, stubborn and uninvited. You wipe your mouth with the back of your hand and glance at the window. Morning light filters through, carrying dust motes that drift like tiny planets, suspended in their own quiet orbits. You breathe deeply, though you know the air is tinged with things better left unnamed. The furnace calls for more fuel. You answer it by adding charcoal, sliding the pieces in one by one. The fire responds with gratitude, brightening, warming the room. You feel the heat on your face. Your hands, gloved and steady, move with a focus that borders on reverence. You watch the materials soften and swirl, their reactions subtle and impossible to predict. Something within you hopes for an unexpected result. Something larger accepts the likelihood that the mixture will behave exactly as it always does. Your mind drifts as your hands continue their work. You think about the ruler's voice, soft, measured, hopeful, in a way that feels heavier than sternness. Those expectations linger here more strongly than the scent of mercury. They sit on the shelves beside the cracked glass, on the floor near the furnace door, in the spaces between your breaths. Though you were never explicitly commanded to succeed, the tone of his words implied a future he believes he is owed. And you, in this dim room of tools and fumes, must somehow uphold that future with little more than heat, patience, and the illusion of progress. The experiment continues. A thin ribbon of smoke curls upward, pale and almost beautiful. You lean closer, adjusting the angle of the vessel. The colour shifts, a minor change, fleeting, easily missed. Your pulse quickens, not with expectation, but with the familiar ache of recognition. The transformation is partial, too small to celebrate, too stubborn to dismiss. You are left with the same question that all alchemists eventually face. Is this failure the beginning of success, or simply failure wearing a new shade? You blow lightly on the surface of the mixture, watching the ripples settle. A small crack forms along the edge of the crucible, almost inaudible. You set it aside, adding it to the collection of flawed pieces that accumulate over time, like chapters of a book no one asked you to write. Each crack is a reminder that the materials here are honest in a way people are not. They break when pushed too far. They complain when heated beyond reason. They do not disguise their limits. Hours pass in a slow, steady unraveling. Lines of notes gather on the parchment, tracing the rise and fall of small reactions. The room grows warmer, then cooler. Light shifts from gold to blue as the sun moves overhead. You remain at work, half listening to the building's steady breath. Footsteps in distant corridors, faint murmurs from adjacent rooms, the far-off toll of a bell marking time that never truly belonged to you. At last you extinguish the furnace. The fire sighs into silence. You sit on a wooden stool, rubbing your hands together until the stiffness leaves your fingers. The room seems larger without the glow, shadows reclaiming their corners. You feel the slight throb behind your eyes that always comes after a long morning around fumes. It is not pain exactly, more the sensation of carrying a thought too heavy for the mind to balance. You survey the room once more. Nothing remarkable lies before you. The metals rest unchanged. The mixtures cooled into dull lumps. The tools appear exactly as they did when you entered. And yet the ruler will ask what you have accomplished, and you will answer with careful words that emphasize patience, nuance, and promise. You will not mention the metallic taste still clinging to your tongue. You will not mention the cracks. You will not mention how often hope feels identical to delusion when you stand alone in this room. You clean the bench slowly, feeling the grain of the wood beneath your cloth. The laboratory settles with you, falling into the quiet that follows a spent effort. The room has the serenity of a chapel after midnight, dim, expectant listening. You pause before leaving, placing your hand on the furnace one last time. The iron is cool now, mute and waiting. When you step back into the corridor, the change in air feels startling. Lighter, freer, touched by scents that do not cling to the skin. You take a deeper breath than you've taken in hours, letting the coolness unwind the tight coil in your chest. The castle hums in its usual reserved manner, unaware of the small battles fought in the laboratory below. You walk forward, guided more by habit than thought, and the corridor carries you toward whatever waits next. The residue of Mercury lingers on your tongue, faint but insistent, a reminder that hope and hazard always walk beside you here. Quiet companions in a craft that promises everything and delivers only what the world already knows. Night settles over the castle in a way daylight never quite manages, soft, measured, unhurried. It wraps itself around the stone corridors like a second skin, muting every step and swallowing every distant sound. You walk through that hush with a lantern held low, watching its faint glow ripple across the floor. The light feels smaller at this hour, as though even flame grows tired under the weight of darkness. Your breath leaves pale threads in the air, rising and disappearing before they can linger. The laboratory greets you differently after dusk. Its daytime restlessness smooths into something quieter, almost expectant, as though the room knows that nights are when alchemists try hardest to coax meaning out of stubborn matter. You push the door open with your shoulder, and a cool draught drifts past you, the lingering memory of the hours when the furnace slept. The smell of old experiments hangs in the stillness, layers of smoke and metallic residue woven together so thoroughly that neither will ever entirely fade. You set the lantern down and strike a flint to the hearth. Sparks bloom and vanish. When the fire catches, its first breath is a bright flare, then it calms into a steady glow. Shadows shift across the walls, bending around shelves lined with glass vessels that reflect the flame like silent watchers. You place a copper pot near the heat, feeling its weight pull at your arm. The metal has a way of absorbing warmth slowly, stubbornly, like someone who listens but answers only after a long silence. Preparing mixtures at night carries a different rhythm. In the dimness, each movement becomes deliberate. Powders sift more softly. Liquids pour with a smoothed patience, glinting like ink in a scholar's lamp. You gather the ingredients with the calm precision of someone who knows that rushing leads only to shattered glass or poisoned air. The mortar rests cool beneath your hand, its surface worn smooth from years of being asked to pulverize ambition. You crush a brittle mineral, listening to the quiet crackle beneath the pestle. The sound echoes faintly, then dissolves into the stillness. You measure a few grains into a small bowl, tilting it so the lantern catches the pale shimmer of the powder. It is always surprising how beautiful certain substances look, moments before they ruin any mixture they touch. You feel the familiar mix of affection and caution, the dual nature of your work, always coaxing wonder from materials that resist every touch. You heat the first vessel slowly, letting the flame rise until the liquid begins to tremble. The surface quivers, like a thought grappling with its own uncertainty. Steam curls upward in thin white strands, drifting toward the beams overhead. The scent is mild at first, earthy, almost pleasant, but deepens as the mixture thickens. Soon the air grows heavier, tinged with bitterness and the faint sweetness of something reacting poorly. You wipe your sleeve across your forehead. The warmth of the furnace clings to your skin. Time stretches. Minutes feel indistinguishable from hours. The night outside remains still, and the stone walls keep it at a distance, letting you work in the suspended quiet where only the soft hiss of vapours dares to speak. The bubbling becomes more rhythmic, almost hypnotic. It reminds you of a restless mind, ideas forming and dissolving, swelling with promise before collapsing into nothing definite. Watching it can be strangely calming, even when you know the mixture is unlikely to deliver anything useful. Alchemy is generous with illusions. It lets you believe progress is only another hour away, even when that hour drags into a dozen, with nothing transformed but your patience. You lean closer, adjusting the flame with a small twist of the iron handle. The pot responds with a faint groan as the heat intensifies. The liquid surges once, then settles. A puff of smoke escapes, carrying a metallic tang that lands on your tongue with a dull weight. You breathe out slowly, letting the taste sit there, the signature of nights spent chasing a shimmer of truth that never quite solidifies. Sometimes the room feels as though it exists outside of time. Minute after minute folds into the same soft glow, the same scent of heat and metal, the same quiet insistence from the materials that they will not bend simply because you ask them to. You scratch a few lines into your notes, the quill whispering across the page. The words do little more than document failure in elaborate detail. Yet the ritual helps steady your thoughts. A second mixture warms on the adjacent grate. This one is more temperamental, a blend known for its unpredictable moods. You stir it gently with a thin rod, watching the surface reflect the amber light. Its colour deepens, then lightens as though the liquid cannot decide what it wants to become. You coax it with a patience that feels older than your own years. The liquid bubbles softly, sending out a scent that resembles dried herbs, burnt too slowly. There is something quietly humbling about the way the substances behave. They respond to heat but refuse interpretation. They simmer with possibility but refuse direction. They glow, hiss, darken, lighten, and then settle into something unremarkable. You observe each stage with the acceptance of someone who has learned the quiet truth that this craft is shaped more by persistence than discovery. The hours drift without announcement. You hear the occasional shift of the castle above, a door closing softly, a guard adjusting his armour. The distant groan of wood expanding as the night air cools. These sounds drift down the corridor, like tiny reminders that the world still exists beyond the laboratory, though it remains indifferent to what transpires behind your door. The castle is a patient observer. It has seen many alchemists work themselves into exhaustion before finally learning that fire is not persuaded by ambition. You return your attention to the main vessel. The mixture has darkened into a shade that promises depth but offers only opacity. It swirls like ink drawn into warm currents. You lean closer, searching for the subtle shift, any sign that the contents are breaking their stubborn monotony. The steam rises and curls around your face, bringing with it the bitter taste that marks another step in the process. You inhale carefully, letting the weight of the scent settle before stepping back. It occurs to you, as it does on many such nights, that the room asks for more than your skill. It asks for hours you cannot reclaim, breaths you must surrender to fumes, and a steady willingness to believe that understanding is only slightly beyond reach. It is a kind of quiet devotion, not the reverence of saints, but the patience of those who labour at the edge of a truth that rarely reveals itself. You refresh the fire once again, sliding fresh charcoal into its belly. The flames leap up eagerly, illuminating the room with renewed warmth. Your shadow stretches across the wall, wavering with the fire's rhythm. You watch it move as though studying another person entirely, someone bound to this place by obligation and by an almost stubborn loyalty to questions that do not answer themselves. When the bubbling slows, you lift the vessel carefully, holding it with thick cloth to avoid burning your hands. You pour a thin stream of the mixture into a glass dish, watching it cool and thicken. It hardens into a dull surface, uninspiring, a reminder that the night's hopes often congeal into shapes that defy interpretation. You place the dish aside and begin the long process of cleaning the tools, wiping each one until the metal gleams faintly under the lantern's glow. The quill scratches once more as you record the final results. You do not embellish. You have learned that the materials refuse to be flattered. They accept documentation only as witness, never as praise. Your handwriting grows slower, more deliberate, until the last line trails into silence. When you extinguish the lantern, the room dips into a darkness so complete it feels thick. You stand still, letting your eyes adjust, allowing the quiet to settle over you like a blanket worn thin by years of use, and the heat from the furnace fades slowly, leaving the air cool again. You inhale deeply, accepting that you will carry the scent of smoke with you long after you leave. As you step into the corridor, the castle greets you with a chill. Torches flicker low, throwing distorted shapes along the walls. The night is nearly gone, though you cannot yet see the first light of morning. Your footsteps echo faintly as you walk, not toward rest, but toward whatever small demands the dawn will bring. Behind you, in the quiet laboratory, the remnants of the night's efforts cool into silence, stubborn mixtures that refuse to transform, vapours that rose and then surrendered to stillness, dreams that boiled and dissipated like steam meeting air. Morning gathers slowly over the castle, flattening the last threads of night and replacing them with the muted murmur of waking voices. You lift your cloak around your shoulders as you cross the inner courtyard, its stones still cool beneath the soles of your boots. Mist clings to the edges of the walls, reluctant to leave, curling around the arches as though listening for whatever secrets the day might spill. Servants hurry past with lowered heads, their footsteps soft, their breaths clouding faintly in the crisp breeze. Somewhere above, a bell tolls, a single note stretched thin, enough to summon movement from those who serve ideas rather than tasks. You follow the sound through a narrow passageway, arriving at a chamber where scholars gather like moths drawn to the same dim candle. The door stands ajar, voices spilling out in fragments. Confident, embellished, resting on the precise tone that makes uncertain claims sound immovable. When you step inside, a dozen heads lift only briefly before returning to the warmth of their own opinions. The scholars sit around a long table cluttered with scrolls and half-finished diagrams drawn in charcoal. Their robes flow like dark waves when they shift, each movement practiced enough to convey a kind of gravitas. A few hold quills poised dramatically above parchment, waiting for inspiration that may or may not arrive. You take a place near the end of the table, near a window where filtered sunlight glows across the worn wood. The discussions begin before you settle fully into your seat. A man with a narrow beard speaks first, insisting that the invisible essence of all metals shares a single origin. He raises his hand with theatrical certainty, as though lifting an invisible goblet filled with truth. Another, broader, older, counters him immediately, describing a theory built on nothing more than the way light reflects on damp stone. Their words fold on top of one another, overlapping like waves that crash without ever reaching the shore. You watch their gestures, their shifting expressions, the amused glances they exchange when someone's idea veers too close to the improbable. What strikes you most is not their conviction, but their comfort. They do not fear being wrong, they fear being uninteresting. Certainty is less a pursuit here and more a performance. You rest your hands on the table and let their confident claims wash over you, their voices filling the room with the familiar hum of men who have mistaken debate for discovery. A scholar near you unfurls a scroll so long it trails onto the floor. He taps its margins with a pointed finger, explaining with absolute assurance how the heavens influence the behavior of Mercury. He leans closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, telling you that the stars shift subtly when someone mixes metals with noble intentions. He says this as though he has witnessed it himself, though the ink stains on his cuff suggest his observations rarely rise beyond the height of the table. Another scholar enters late, robes rustling dramatically, as though the wind itself escorted him. He carries a stack of bound notes that he drops onto the table with a soft thud, announcing that he has uncovered a new method for stabilizing volatile compounds. When he opens the cover, however, you see pages filled with annotations so contradictory they almost cancel each other out. He speaks with flair, eyes bright with self-importance, as if the mere act of gesturing over ink grants it credibility. Their discussions drift between the mystical and the mechanical, never landing squarely on either. They reference ancient texts with the confidence of people quoting wisdom. Though half the texts are known to contradict the others, you watch as hands slice through the air, robes sway with each dramatic turn of phrase, and theories multiply like sparks from a flint. It is all strangely mesmerizing, a courtly dance where knowledge is less important than appearances. You speak only when addressed, offering small observations that you phrase carefully. The scholars nod, some approvingly, others dismissively, all pretending to weigh your words against their own mental libraries. A few ask about your experiments, not with genuine curiosity, but with the expectation that your answers will supply them with new metaphors for their next debate. You answer honestly, though you temper the truth with a gentleness they seem to prefer, avoiding any harsh suggestion that nature resists the narratives they wrap around it. At one point, a scholar recounts the tale of a man he claims turned tin into gold through sheer purity of spirit. The others murmur admiration, though a few raise their eyebrows, pretending skepticism only to sharpen the brilliance of their eventual agreement. You observe their faces, illuminated softly by the morning light, and realize how thriving their confidence is, how it grows tallest where the soil of understanding is thinnest. The head scholar, a man with a voice quiet enough to command attention, raises a hand. His gesture silences the room with practiced ease. He begins to outline a theory about the transformation of elements through divine favour. His tone carries the weight of someone who has spent years crafting the perfect balance between humility and self-importance. Each sentence comes out shaped deliberately, polished like a stone that has been handled too many times. The others listen with reverence, nodding as though in the presence of revelation. You fold your hands, listening. His ideas drift into the familiar realm where philosophy masquerades as science. He describes invisible energies that respond to intention, spiritual currents that move through the air, unnoticed yet undeniably real. According to him, the scholars murmur their approval, charmed by the elegance of the theory rather than its plausibility. You feel a subtle warmth in your chest, not of agreement, but of quiet amusement. Certainty does seem to flourish here, flourishing best where proof cannot reach. As the discussion crescendos, the room grows warmer. The window beside you lets in a faint breath of fresh air, carrying the scent of the gardens outside. Damp earth, wilted petals, and sun-warmed leaves. The contrast reminds you how small and circular the debates have become, how the castle walls seem to trap sound as easily as they trap ambition. You look around and notice the scholars leaning closer to the table, voices rising, hands gesturing so broadly their sleeves sweep across the parchment. You watch them with a detached curiosity. Their minds race confidently in circles, weaving elegant structures out of speculation and self-assured phrasing. You can almost admire it, the artistry of believing so firmly in something so insubstantial. It is not deceit, not exactly, more a comfortable blindness, chosen willingly, because certainty is a warm cloak in a draughty world. When the debate pauses, a servant enters with a tray of wine. Glasses are poured, and the scholars accept them with the air of men who believe their discussions deserve ceremonial accompaniment. The scent of spiced wine drifts upward, mixing with the smell of ink and dust. You take a glass hesitantly, letting the warmth touch your fingers. The scholars toast to progress, though no one defines the word. The conversation softens after that, dissolving into scattered dialogues about minor observations, rumours of new manuscripts, and whispered tales of failed experiments conveniently blamed on unlucky stars. You listen quietly, finding a strange comfort in their predictable uncertainty disguised as authority. Eventually the meeting wanes. Scholars drift from the table in slow waves, robes brushing the floor, footsteps echoing down the corridor in a tired, thoughtful rhythm. A few offer polite nods to you before disappearing into the castle's long hallways, each carrying the glow of self-satisfaction that comes from speaking convincingly about things they do not fully grasp. You remain seated a moment longer, letting the room grow still. Sunlight slips across the floor, pale and forgiving. You feel the faint residue of their words lingering in the air. Confident, unexamined, buoyant, you exhale not in frustration, but in quiet recognition. Here, authority belongs not to those who understand, but to those who sound like they do. When you finally rise, the corridor outside feels cooler, its silence a small mercy after the density of voices. You walk forward, leaving behind the scholars and their confident uncertainties, carrying with you the strange blend of amusement and melancholy that comes from witnessing knowledge dressed in its finest robes, pretending it does not tremble beneath the fabric. The castle stretches ahead, long hallways shaped by ambition, duty, and 1,000 unanswered questions, waiting for your next step. A court attendant meets you in the corridor, his steps brisk, his expression politely fixed into the kind of smile that suggests he has little choice in escorting you wherever you're meant to go. He bows slightly, gestures for you to follow, and turns without waiting for your answer. His pace is steady, practiced, the pace of someone who has walked these hallways so often that even the stones seem to know the rhythm of his stride. You follow him through a narrow stairway that curves like the inside of a seashell, the air cooling as you descend. Torches flicker along the walls, their flames wavering in slow arcs that throw uncertain shadows. Each step echoes faintly. You smell dust before you see anything else, a dry, chalky scent that clings to old parchment and older ambitions. The attendant stops before a heavy door, reinforced with iron bands, places his hand on the latch and pushes it open with a quiet grunt. The room beyond is dimly lit, but the moment you step inside, the space feels alive in its own peculiar way. It's a long vaulted chamber, lined with cabinets made of dark wood, polished to a muted sheen. Shelves bow under the weight of objects that defy easy categorization. The air is thick with the smells of dried herbs, candle wax, and the distinct musk of things that have been left to gather mystery as eagerly as they gather dust. The attendant motions for you to explore freely, then stations himself by the door like a statue whose job is simply to remain present. You walk forward, your boots whispering across the stone floor. A glass case near you holds an assortment of bones arranged with great confidence, but little understanding. A jawbone sits beside a rib that could not possibly belong to the same creature. Someone has labelled the collection in a neat hand, remains of a giant from the northern wastes. You tilt your head. The proportions suggest nothing more exotic than a goat, but the caption stands firm, bolstered by the court's eagerness to believe in wonders. You move to the next case. Inside lies a sphere of polished stone, smooth, suck and unimpressive, except for the fervour with which it is guarded. A faded note beneath it reads simply, "The heart of a fallen star." You touch the cool glass. The stone is likely just basalt, common enough to pave roads in other lands, yet here it is elevated to celestial glory. You find yourself smiling, not unkindly, but with the quiet awareness of someone who recognizes how skillfully the court turns ordinary things into marvels. Novelty is a dependable companion here. Accuracy is not. Farther in, you find relics arranged with meticulous care. A splinter of wood claimed to be from Noah's Ark, an iron nail supposedly pulled from the heel of a saint, a feather advertised as belonging to a phoenix, though its streaked coloration suggests a peacock with delusions of grandeur. Each item seems to come with a story, as elaborate as the embroidery on the attendant's cuffs. You run your fingers along the edge of one cabinet, letting the grain of the wood steady your thoughts. A large table occupies the centre of the room, its surface covered with strange mechanisms in various states of incompletion. You lean over a brass device brimming with gears that move in hesitant, jerky rotations. It resembles a clock that cannot decide what hour it wishes to announce. A parchment beside it claims it is designed to predict the shape of the future based on the motion of the planets. You can almost appreciate the ambition, even if the device looks more likely to collapse under its own enthusiasm than to provide cosmic insight. Another invention sits half-shrouded beneath a linen cloth. You lift the covering carefully and find a set of wings fashioned from thin metal rods and stiffened parchment, a personal flying apparatus, the note claims. You hold one of the wings in your hand. It feels fragile, too delicate for the weight of even a small man. You imagine someone strapping these to their arms and leaping from a height, certain they would glide like a great bird. The thought brings a solemn amusement. Human optimism can be brave or foolish. Here, it is often both at once. You wander deeper into the room, stopping at a cabinet lined with glass jars. Inside each one floats something suspended in liquid. Small creatures with too many limbs, plants whose leaves curl like fists, a fish with two heads that stares outward with unblinking resignation. The liquid distorts their shapes slightly, making them seem stranger than they likely are. You study them carefully, knowing the castle enjoys turning abnormalities into revelations. Anything unfamiliar becomes sacred here, especially if it unsettles the mind more than it informs it. The attendant clears his throat softly, a reminder that you are welcome to look but not to linger too long. You move on, drawn to a narrow shelf filled with manuscripts, arranged like fragile monuments. You pull one open gently. The pages contain diagrams of impossible machines, contraptions that claim to distill moonlight into nourishment or allow a man to hear the thoughts of animals. The handwriting is neat, confident, as though the author never doubted a single line. Certainty, again, seems to thrive where the improbable takes root. You feel a soft warmth spreading through the room, not from the torches, but from the peculiar joy that fills these collections. It is the joy of people believing they live on the cusp of revelation, even when the objects around them whisper more about confusion than clarity. The court takes pride in these curiosities, parading them before visitors as evidence of its intellectual prowess, unaware or uninterested that many of the items betray little more than hopeful misinterpretation. You reach a tall cabinet at the far end of the room. Inside lies a collection of stones, metals, and minerals labelled in careful script: iron from Mars, gold from the bottom of the ocean, the first drop of solidified fire. You pick up a lump of dark metal, heavy in your palm. It is ordinary iron. The label insists otherwise. You place it back gently, knowing better than to disturb the delicate ecosystem of belief that sustains this room. As you explore, the attendant finally speaks. His voice is soft, reverent. He tells you that the Emperor treasures these objects as proof of the world's mysteries, as reminders that the boundaries of knowledge can be stretched by those daring enough to attempt it. You nod, though a part of you recognizes a different truth. These curiosities serve another purpose too. They shield the ruler from the disappointment of the ordinary. They allow him to surround himself with wonders when the real world proves less obedient than he desires. You continue your slow circuit of the room, feeling the strange warmth of amusement, offset by the faint sting of recognition. The same hunger that placed these objects here is the hunger that drives the expectations placed on you. An appetite for marvels, for transformations, for proofs that the world can be reshaped by will and imagination. Yet as you move from mislabeled bone to exaggerated relic to unfinished invention, you sense that the castle has built a sanctuary for illusions. Here, appearance triumphs gently over reality, and novelty masquerades as genius with a serene confidence. You pause once more before leaving, letting your gaze sweep over the assortment of wonders. The room holds a charm that is difficult to deny. Everything here tells a story polished by admiration rather than truth. You breathe in the dusty air, touched by candle smoke and old parchment, and you feel the weight of the court's ambitions settle around you in a quiet, persistent way. When you step back into the corridor, the air feels clearer, but not lighter. The door closes softly behind you, sealing away the Emperor's cherished illusions. Objects preserved not for what they are, but for what people wish them to be. You walk down the dim hallway, carrying with you the quiet realization that genius here is often measured not by accuracy, but by how confidently one can claim the extraordinary. You leave the Chamber of Curiosities with the quiet weight of candle smoke clinging to your clothes, stepping into a corridor where the light changes in thin, deliberate increments. It narrows ahead of you, turning into one of those long passageways. The castle seems to hide within itself like veins beneath skin. The stones underfoot are smooth in the centre and uneven near the edges, worn down by generations of purposeful footsteps. The air here carries a dryness that reminds you of parchment waiting for ink, receptive, silent, and ready to hold whatever story passes through. Voices drift toward you before you see anyone, not conversations exactly, but fragments of intention wrapped in a practiced softness. The castle teaches people to speak without saying much, to fill space with tone rather than meaning. You slow your pace as the whispers sharpen into clearer strands. Names pass through the air with the delicacy of someone handling fragile glass. Praise glides over the walls with suspicious ease, and caution flutters beneath it like wings too small to carry anything heavy. You walk deeper into the corridor and sense eyes following you without turning your direction. The corridor is lined with niches holding small bronze busts of past emperors, each one gazing forward with a stern stillness. Their expressionless faces feel like part of the architecture, symbols of people who believed they understood power even as it moved beneath them like shifting ground. You catch your reflection in the polished bronze. The faint distortion makes you look tired, thoughtful, uncertain. You keep walking. Court officials move in measured clusters. Their robes whisper against the stone as they pass, the sound sharp and deliberate, like pages turning in a book you are not allowed to read fully. They speak in half-finished sentences and exchanged glances that convey more than words could. A single raised eyebrow, a subtle tightening of the mouth. Small movements here feel like declarations. You try to move quietly, not out of fear, but because the corridor seems to prefer subtlety over boldness. Two men stand near an arched doorway, their posture relaxed, but their eyes alert. Their voices drop to a murmur as you approach. You catch a few phrases, mentions of a noble who has fallen out of favour, a petition dismissed with a soft smile that was interpreted as final judgment, a new rumour about the emperor's latest intellectual fascination. These fragments drift into your awareness like stray ash from a fire. They cling for a moment, then fade, leaving you to wonder how much of what you heard was truth and how much was ceremony masquerading as knowledge. A court scribe hurries past, holding a stack of parchment close to his chest. The ink on the top sheet glistens, still wet, forming sentences written with the precision of someone who understands the cost of error. He avoids looking at you directly, though his eyes flicker briefly toward your hands, noticing the faint stains of work. There is a quiet hierarchy here, one judged not by worth but by usefulness, and usefulness changes as quickly as the emperor's interests. As you continue, the corridor bends gently to the right, widening into a space lined with tapestries depicting allegorical scenes. Figures in embroidered gold thread reach upward towards symbols of victory, while others kneel beneath burdens woven in darker hues. The fabric carries the faint scent of dust and old dyes. You pause before one tapestry showing a man exchanging a glowing object with a king. The gestures are dramatic, the expressions exaggerated, the scene captured with all the elegance of fantasy. You study the man's face, uplifted, hopeful, blind to the cost of the gift in his hands. You recognize the posture of someone offering what he cannot truly control. Footsteps approach from behind. A woman in a deep red gown moves past you with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being observed. Her gaze meets yours briefly, steady and unbothered, before sliding away just enough to remind you she must always listen for what is said in rooms she is not invited into. She nods once, a gesture neither friendly nor cold, merely functional. In this place, acknowledgement is its own form of currency. You turn a corner and find a different rhythm waiting. The corridor here seems to pulse with quieter energy. A pair of courtiers stand so close together, their whispers sound like breath shared between two flames, their faces tilt toward each other, their eyes sharp, their words carefully contained. You do not linger, but the silence that follows your passing feels weighted, as though they paused not to hide anything, but to assess what you might assume. Farther on, a counselor emerges from a doorway, smoothing the sleeves of his robe in a gesture that could be nerves or calculation. He greets you with a small bow, precise, respectful, but noticeably formal. His eyes scan your expression with the fleeting inquisitiveness of someone measuring whether you pose an advantage or a complication. When he speaks, his tone is polished, laced with politeness so perfect it reveals nothing of the thought behind it. You answer with equal restraint, and for a few seconds, the corridor feels less like a hallway and more like an arena with hidden rules. You continue walking, and the corridor continues its subtle tests. Every face you pass seems to carry two expressions, one worn outwardly, dignified and composed, and another tucked behind the eyes, flickering with caution or ambition. The closer you move to the heart of the castle, the more you feel the tension that lives beneath the floorboards. A tension created not by conflict, but by anticipation. Here, proximity to power does not promise security. Instead, it sharpens every movement, turning small gestures into possible missteps. You reach a small alcove where a single bench sits beneath a narrow window. Light spills through in a thin beam, dust drifting within it like soft fragments of memory. You sit briefly, letting your hands rest on your knees. The quiet feels heavier here, almost contemplative. From your seat, you can hear whispers travel the length of the corridor, weaving themselves into a tapestry of discreet warnings and subtle invitations. Some voices rise with confidence, others tremble slightly beneath controlled breaths. A group of scholars passes, not the ones from earlier, but their kin in tone and demeanour. They speak of appointments and recommendations, their phrases twisted elegantly to hide intentions. One mentions a minor official who earned the emperor's brief smile that morning. Another mutters that such smiles rarely last. Laughter follows, soft and hushed, as though the walls themselves cost a fee for every sound that dares grow too loud. You watch them for a moment, feeling the strange blend of amusement and caution curl at the edge of your thoughts. Human approval shifts more unpredictably than any substance you have ever heated in a crucible. Mercury at least behaves by rules it cannot break. People break their own rules easily, reshaping their loyalties to fit the day's climate. You stand again, continuing your path, feeling the corridor stretch ahead like a long sigh. The further you move, the more the whispers feel personal, not directed at you, but orbiting around the idea of anyone who might rise or fall by the emperor's mood. You understand that favour here is less a reward and more a fragile thread. A thing spun quickly and broken even faster. You inhale slowly, feeling the cool air touch your lungs. The scent of stone and candle smoke steadies your step. When you reach the final turn, the corridor opens into a wide hall. Sunlight pours through tall windows, lighting the floor in soft, angled patterns. People stand in small groups, their voices low, their stances carefully arranged. They speak with the practiced elegance of those who understand the cost of misplacing a single word. You watch the way they hold themselves, poised as if someone might enter at any moment and alter the hierarchy with a glance. You pause at the threshold, letting the scene settle. The hall feels like the centre of gravity in a world made of subtle calculations. Every nod here seems to carry the weight of a decision. Every smile conceals a ledger of favours owed or earned. Approval moves through the space like an invisible current, warming some, chilling others. You step forward into that quiet, intricate landscape, feeling the gentle press of a truth you have come to recognise. In this castle, the most unstable element is neither metal nor flame. It is the shifting measure of human regard. The warmth of the day fades slowly as you make your way back toward the quieter part of the castle, where corridors grow narrower and torches burn with smaller, steadier flames. Evening air presses gently against your skin, carrying the faint scent of smoke from hearths being lit for the night. Servants with downcast eyes move past you in soft waves. The stone beneath your feet holds a memory of sunlight, though it cools with every step you take deeper into the dimness. Your laboratory door yields with the familiar weight of stubborn hinges. Inside, the space waits in a half-lit hush, the last trace of daylight slipping through the small window like a fading promise. You strike a match and light a pair of candles, their flames trembling as though startled by being awakened again. Shadows rise with them, stretching upward along the walls until they blend with the smoke-dark beams overhead. You settle before the furnace, feeling its cold mouth breathe faintly against your hands. A lump of lead rests on the bench beside you, dull and heavy, the kind of metal that carries no aspirations of brilliance. You lift it with both hands and place it in the crucible. The weight feels more symbolic than physical, the burden of something expected to become more than it was ever meant to be. The flame catches slowly, growing from a thin tongue of orange into a steady glow. You adjust the bellows, coaxing the fire to life. Heat rises in slow waves, brushing your cheeks with the warmth of a creature waking reluctantly from sleep. You watch the lead begin to soften, the edges dulling, as the metal endures the first step in a long, uncertain transformation. Your breath stirs the candles, making their flames tremble. The flicker of light dances across your notes and the scattered tools on the bench. For a moment, it almost looks like the room is breathing with you, sharing in the quiet anticipation. The sound of the furnace deepens, a soft roar settling into steadiness. You lean closer, gazing into the small pool of molten metal forming in the crucible. Gold. The thought floats through you like a slow exhale, not the gold in the emperor's imagination, or the gold in old texts that promise enlightenment to those who dare seek its perfection. This is a different kind of gold, a word that has grown heavier with expectations, stretched thin by ambition, sharpened into something that resembles judgment. You feel the pressure of it, not as a substance, but as an accusation waiting in the dim room, hovering at the edge of everything you attempt. The lead bubbles softly as the heat intensifies. You stir it with a thin rod, watching the surface ripple in sluggish waves. Nothing about the process appears promising, yet your hands continue with a patience that feels both dutiful and weary. Alchemy's greatest cruelty is not failure, it is the way failure can mimic progress, just enough to keep you reaching again. You reach for a small vial containing a powder finer than ash. When you unstopper it, a faint metallic scent rises. Sharp enough to catch in your throat, you sprinkle a measured amount into the molten metal. Instantly, the surface reacts, flaring with a muted shimmer. The colour shifts, deepens, then settles back into dullness. A sigh escapes you, not of disappointment, but of quiet recognition. The material resists transformation with the same stubborn honesty it has always shown. The candlelight wavers again, casting thin, wrinkled shadows across the pages of your notes. You turn a page and write a few lines, the ink forming careful strokes. You do not embellish, nor do you soften your observations. You merely mark the behaviour of the mixture, knowing the emperor will not ask for these details. He prefers the promise that sits between your words, the possibility that one experiment might yield something worth hoping for. The lead in the crucible glows faintly, like a memory refusing to brighten. You adjust the flame again, letting the heat rise slowly. Sweat forms along your temples, and you brush it away with the back of your wrist. The laboratory has a way of swallowing sound. Even the crackle of the fire feels subdued, as though the walls absorb noise with the same hunger. They absorb hope. You pause to catch your breath. The air feels thick, carrying the metallic tang that clings to you after long hours of work. You swallow, tasting the faint residue of vapour on your tongue. You lean back, resting your hands on the edge of the bench. The warmth seeps into your palms, grounding you. In the stillness, your thoughts drift unwillingly to the ruler's expectation. The soft, deliberate tone with which he speaks about transformation, his eyes steady, as though convinced the world is only waiting for a suitable mind to reveal its secrets. It is a seductive belief, one that pulls you forward even when you sense the folly beneath it. The promise of gold is not simply a scientific challenge, it is a quiet chain, wrapped gently but firmly around your days. You reach for another mixture, a small jar of tiny crystals. that gleam faintly in the candlelight. You tap a few into a spoon, then mix them into the molten lead. Again, the reaction is small, barely noticeable. A flicker of colour, a hiss of steam, a ripple across the surface that disappears almost as soon as it forms. You lean forward, examining the mixture with a careful eye, searching for any change that could be interpreted, honestly or generously, as progress. As the minutes stretch, you become aware of the faint ticking of the clock on the far wall. Its sound breaks the silence in slow, deliberate beats. The passage of time feels heavier here, as though each second asks quietly whether the metal is becoming anything more than itself. You stir the mixture again. The liquid clings to the rod, sliding down with a thick reluctance. You watch it until the last drop falls back into the crucible. The room feels still enough to hear your own breathing. The fire flickers with a soft sighing sound, as if empathizing with your persistence. Gold remains an idea more than an element, a shape formed from longing, a word the Emperor holds gently, and you hold cautiously, a mirror that reflects what people desire more than what the world contains. In the dimness, you feel that truth settle around you with a quiet clarity. You pour the molten metal into a mould, watching it cool into a dull, misshapen lump. The surface hardens quickly, its colour unchanged, its weight unchanged, its refusal unchanged. You set it aside, marking the result with a simple note. No transformation, no revelation. Only the familiar resilience of reality against the hopeful pressure of heat. The candles burn lower, their flames shrinking. Shadows lengthen across the room, stretching toward the corners like tired thoughts. Seeking rest, you stretch your fingers, feeling the faint stiffness that comes from holding tools for too long. The air grows cooler as the furnace dims. You sit for a moment longer, elbows on your knees, hands loosely clasped. The faint glow of embers warms your face. Around you, the laboratory watches quietly, its shelves and jars and dusty corners, holding the day's efforts without judgment. Even failure feels softened here, wrapped in the calm that arrives after a task is done, however imperfectly. You exhale, long and slow. The burden of gold presses less urgently in the quiet. Not gone, never gone, but less sharp, less chest-tightening. For now, it rests beside you rather than on you. You extinguish the final candle and rise. The room dims to a soft darkness. The embers in the furnace the only source of light. They pulse gently, like a heart slowing after exertion. As you step into the corridor, the cool air brushes your face. The castle lies in near silence. And somewhere, in a chamber filled with dreams, polished brighter than reason, a ruler sleeps believing that tomorrow might bring brilliance. You walk onward, carrying with you the truth that gold is more than a metal. It is a question you're expected to answer, even when the answer refuses to take shape. Night deepens around the castle with a heaviness that feels almost deliberate, as though darkness has been invited inside to muffle the world. The corridors quiet one by one, doors settling into stillness, torches shrinking into thin flames that tremble whenever a draught slips through an unseen crack. You walk slowly, letting the silence gather at your heels. Every step feels softer in this hour, as though the stone prefers whispering to remembering. Your laboratory door responds to your touch with its familiar groan, an old sound softened by time. Inside, the air hangs cool and metallic, dense enough to coat your tongue before you take 2 steps. You close the door behind you and breathe in a thin breath, steadying yourself as the room settles around you, like a cloak you did not fully choose, but have grown accustomed to wearing. On the workbench, a set of glass dishes waits with the patience of inanimate things. You light a candle, its flame blooming into a small, wavering star. The light glides across the surfaces of the dishes, revealing thin beads of mercury scattered like fragments of a broken thought. The droplets quiver when you move closer, as though startled by your presence. You take up a small glass rod and guide one bead toward another. They pull together effortlessly, merging in a swift, fluid motion that feels almost alive. Something about the way Mercury behaves has always unsettled you. The simplicity of its union, the refusal to keep the shape you give it, the way it reflects your distorted face in tiny trembling spheres. It listens in ways metals should not, reacting to the slightest tilt of your hand. The candle flame flickers, sending thin shadows darting across the bench. You lower your face toward the glistening silver and watch as the droplets scatter again, splitting into smaller fragments. They slide away from each other, tiny and stubborn, as if trying to escape your intention. Their movement holds a quiet mockery you've come to understand well. Alchemy, for all its language of promise, rarely gives what it hints at. With careful hands, you gather the droplets once more. The metal glides reluctantly toward your tool, forming another quivering oval. Even from this distance, you can feel the faint pull of it, an attraction that never settles into harmony. The silver surface reflects the flame in a way that seems almost mournful, like distant stars caught in the wrong sky. You straighten slowly, rubbing your eyes with the back of your sleeve. The day's work lingers in your muscles, a soreness born not from exertion, but from repetition. Every mixture, every experiment, every attempt to coax transformation out of stubborn matter has left its mark. Not on the substances, but on you. You feel it in the slow tension building at the base of your skull, in the faint tremor that creeps into your fingertips when the night grows too long, in the quiet ache behind your ribs when you remember what drew you into this craft. The flame sputters once, reminding you to shield it against the draft seeping beneath the door. You place a small iron weight near the base of the candle. The room brightens by only a fraction, but the light steadies enough for you to see the sheen of Mercury on your hands. You wipe them on a cloth, knowing the gesture is more ritual than remedy. The metallic taste already settles in your throat, faint but unmistakable. You open a thick leather-bound notebook and turn to a fresh page. The quill scratches lightly, tracing the outline of the droplet's behavior. You write about its shifting, its resistance, its unwillingness to divide predictably. Your handwriting grows slower as you continue, the words thinning into narrow strokes. You stop when you realize you're describing not the metal, but your own fatigue, mirrored in observations that should have been clinical, but drift into something more personal. You set the quill down gently, letting silence swell. The quiet fills the room, like water rising in a basin, slowly, steadily, until it touches everything. You lean forward, resting your forehead on your folded arms. The coolness of the wood seeps into your skin. You close your eyes and listen to the faint crackle of the candle, the soft rattle of the furnace's cooling metal, the distant breath of wind outside the window. For a moment, you allow your thoughts to drift in directions you usually keep tightly bound. You think of the hours surrendered to this room, the nights spent chasing a gleam that slips through your grasp as easily as Mercury across glass. You think of the promises you once made to yourself, promises of discovery, of understanding, of shaping the world with knowledge rather than longing. You think of the ruler's hopeful eyes, the weight behind their quiet questions, the unspoken demand that each failure be hidden beneath a layer of optimism. Your breath grows shallow. A heaviness settles in your chest, not unpleasant, but undeniably present. The regret does not come as a sharp pang. It arrives gently, like fog drifting into familiar streets. You feel it coil around your ribs, soft and steady, leaving you with the quiet realization that transformation is not the only thing that has refused to appear. You have waited for certainty, for a moment of clarity that would justify the sacrifices, time, health, quiet moments of ordinary life. Yet the only clarity that arrives is the understanding of how much you've given to a task that asks endlessly without answering. You lift your head slowly. The mercury bead on the table glimmers faintly, motionless now, as if exhausted by the day's small rebellions. You touch it with the tip of your rod, and it divides again, slipping away in 2 directions. You watch the droplets separate, mirroring the way your own thoughts fragment and scatter each time you try to gather them into something whole. The moonlight filters through the narrow window, falling across the bench in a thin, silver ribbon. It illuminates the mercury just enough to sharpen its edges, turning the droplets into tiny mirrors, reflecting fragments of the room. You see your own shadow tremble in them, distorted, broken into pieces, scattered across the table. The sight sends a small tremor through you, not of fear but of recognition. The metal has become an echo of the way your mind feels, divided, fluid, difficult to contain. You gather the droplets once more, coaxing them into a single shape. For a moment they comply, forming a smooth, trembling dome. You hold your breath, watching their surface ripple in slow waves. The silence around you deepens. The air thickens with heat from the furnace's dying embers. You lower your hand, and the droplet quivers, reflecting both candlelight and moonlight in a single, shimmering point. Then it splits again. You close your eyes, accepting the inevitability of it. The metal will always behave this way. It was never meant to become anything else. You open your eyes and watch the silver fragments settle into their own stillness, no longer fleeing, just existing in small unreachable pieces. The regret in your chest spreads gently, not painful but undeniably present. You breathe in, breathe out. You clean the tools in slow, methodical motions. The candle burns low, its flame bowed under its own weight. When you extinguish it, the room falls into a muted grey, lit only by the moon's thin beam. You step into the corridor, closing the laboratory door behind you with careful quiet. The castle feels colder now. The stones cool beneath your hand as you steady yourself. You walk forward without hurrying, letting the quiet settle through your limbs. Somewhere deep within the walls, you know the night continues, cool, silent, patient. And somewhere inside you, the droplets of mercury still scatter, carrying with them the soft ache of everything you've given up in pursuit of a transformation that never quite arrives. The morning light drifts into the corridor with a softness that feels almost apologetic, as if the sun hesitates to intrude on the castle's lingering quiet. You walk toward the inner courtyard, letting the cool air brush the fatigue from your face. A faint murmur rises from a nearby archway, low voices layered with the calm certainty of men who believe the world is listening closely to their ideas, even when it isn't. You follow the sound and step into a small chamber tucked between 2 staircases. The room is warm, the air scented faintly with crushed herbs and the remnants of burned charcoal. A group of alchemists stands gathered around a circular table, their robes marked with stains from countless experiments, some old and faded, others so recent the fabric still feels stiff. They look up as you enter, greeting you with nods that feel sincere enough to soften the edges of your tired thoughts. One of them, a man with hair tied loosely at his neck, gestures for you to join them. His hands are stained with something that shimmers faintly when it catches the light. You take a step closer, feeling the warmth of their gathered bodies and the quiet confidence radiating from each of them. The table is cluttered with manuscripts, flasks, sketches of strange apparatuses, and tiny piles of coloured powder arranged like offerings. The man with the shimmering hands begins to speak, explaining a new theory he insists will alter the foundation of the art. His voice is smooth, rhythmic, as though rehearsed in solitude before being shared. He describes invisible currents running beneath the world's surface, currents that respond not to force but to intention, bending themselves toward purity of purpose. He speaks with such serene certainty that you almost see the currents he describes, shimmering beneath the floor, waiting to be named. Another alchemist, older and carrying a calm smile, picks up the thread of the conversation. He believes metals possess temperaments, much like people. Some patient, some stubborn, some easily deceived by flattery. He describes coaxing a lump of iron into cooperation by heating it with fragrant herbs rather than charcoal, insisting the scented smoke convinces the metal to open itself to transformation. He tells the story with such gentle conviction that you find yourself nodding before you even realize it. Across the table, a younger practitioner unfurls a sheet of parchment filled with loops of ink that look more like poetry than instruction. He speaks of the moon's favor, how its changing face alters the nature of water when collected at certain hours. He claims that moon-washed water carries secrets no flame can burn away. His tone is soothing, soft enough to make even doubt feel like something that can be set aside for later. You take a seat on a low stool, listening as the theories rotate through the room. Each voice arrives with quiet grace, offering explanations woven from equal parts observation and imagination. The alchemists speak as though knowledge hums just beneath their fingertips, waiting for the right combination of thought and hope to reveal itself. Their confidence is not loud. It flows gently, like warm water over stone. One of the older men leans toward you, lowering his voice as though sharing a precious truth. He recounts an experiment in which he combined powdered antimony with herbs reserved for funerary rites. The mixture darkened, thickened, and then settled into a strange stillness. He is convinced the reaction reveals something about the veil between life and transformation. His words drift into the air with a soft reverence, carrying just enough mystery to leave the room perfectly quiet for a heartbeat. You study the faces around the table. There is no arrogance here, only the calm certainty of people who have made peace with the boundaries of their craft. By gently imagining those boundaries do not exist, you recognize the subtle, almost comforting delusion. It is easier to believe that discovery waits on the horizon than to confront the stubborn truth of metal that refuses to change. A scholar enters with a tray of warm tea, its steam carrying the scent of mint and something lightly floral. The alchemists accept the cups gratefully, sipping with small sighs that release both warmth and affection for the moment. You take your own cup and hold it between your palms, letting the heat seep into your fingers. The room settles into a soft hum of contentment, broken only by the turning of pages and the quiet tapping of someone adjusting a glass vial on the table. The conversation shifts again, this time to failures rendered as stories rather than defeats. One alchemist describes a mixture that behaved beautifully until the final moment, when it erupted into harmless but startling green smoke. He laughs softly as he recounts trying to explain the mishap to a curious courtier, phrasing the event in a way that made it sound intentional. The others join in the laughter, not mocking, but warm, acknowledging the shared experience of salvaging pride with clever phrasing. Another tells of a night spent heating a substance that refused to react in any noticeable way. He remembers staring at the dull mixture until dawn, convinced it must be preparing something momentous. Only later did he accept that it had simply done nothing at all. His serene amusement at the memory softens the sting of the wasted hours. Hope has a way of wrapping even futility in comforting cloth. You listen, feeling a quiet kinship forming around the table. There is something soothing about being among those who understand the peculiar blend of desire and resignation that defines your craft. Their certainty, gentle, unwavering, beautifully irrational, seeps into the room like incense. For a moment you allow yourself to inhabit that certainty, to imagine that understanding lies just beyond reach, waiting for the right phrasing or the right hour of the night. The man with the shimmering hands leans forward again, drawing patterns on the table with his fingertip as he speaks. He explains that metals respond to emotion, that fear or doubt disrupts their inner harmony. He insists The success of transmutation depends on the calmness of the person tending the fire. His eyes shine with conviction, so steady and genuine that it feels almost rude to question him. You sip your tea slowly, the warmth loosening the knots in your chest. The room feels insulated from the outside world, separate from the ruler's expectations, the courtier's glances, the whispering corridors. Here, the pressure eases. Here, the world becomes small enough to hold in your hands, shaped not by demands, but by shared fascination. You look at the vials, the powders, the open books, and for a brief moment they seem filled with possibility, not obligation. As the conversation drifts into a soft lull, some of the alchemists begin packing their notes with careful, almost ceremonial gestures. A few linger near the shelves, examining jars as though greeting old friends. Others rise and move toward the door, offering quiet farewells. Their footsteps fade one by one down the hall, leaving behind the faint scent of herbs and parchment warmed by conversation. You remain seated for a moment longer, gazing at the cluttered table. The gentle delusions they shared still echo in the room, comforting, patient, softly stitched from hope. You feel a strange mixture of gratitude and melancholy. Their confidence, so serene and unwavering, has the power to soothe even when you know it floats on foundations too delicate to hold weight. It is a reminder of the strange refuge alchemy provides, a place where yearning can dress itself as certainty, and where impossible ideas can be spoken aloud without breaking. When you finally rise, the chamber has grown quiet, the lingering warmth of voices fading into the still air. You step through the archway, carrying with you the echo of their calm assurances. The corridor beyond feels cooler, the light gentler, as though the castle itself has paused to listen. You walk forward, letting the soft glow of afternoon gather around you, and somewhere in the quiet of your thoughts, the gentle delusions of your fellow alchemists drift like thin smoke, fragile, comforting, and beautiful in their own small way. The castle summons you with a quiet urgency that moves through its corridors like a draft slipping under doors. A page approaches you in the courtyard, his breath forming small clouds in the cool air. He bows with the stiff caution of someone carrying a message, meant to be delivered without interpretation. When he straightens, his eyes meet yours only briefly before flickering away, as though the mere task of guiding you holds its own delicate risk. You follow him through a passageway lined with high windows. Sunlight spills in pale fragments across the stone floor, interrupted by the shapes of mullions that resemble iron bars more than ornament. Your footsteps echo in a measured pace, soft but steady, and every sound seems amplified in the stillness. A distant murmur of courtiers rises from a distant hall, their polished voices weaving through the air like threads of silk that cannot quite conceal the tension beneath. The page leads you to a tall set of doors, carved with scenes meant to glorify victories that feel as old as legend. He knocks once, then steps aside, leaving you to cross the threshold alone. The chamber inside is warm, the hearth burning quietly, logs arranged so precisely that the fire itself seems to understand its place. Within the room's order, the smell of cedar mingles with a faint hint of incense, an aroma chosen carefully to flatter the senses without overpowering them. The Emperor sits near the window, his chair angled so the light crowns him in a pale halo. When he turns toward you, the gesture is slow, deliberate, as if granting you the privilege of his attention requires a measured effort. His eyes rest on your face with a softness that carries an undertone you cannot quite name, something between expectation and unspoken question. He gestures for you to approach. His hands move gracefully, fingers long and pale, each motion precise enough to suggest he has spent years refining even the way he commands attention. You step closer, aware of how quiet the chamber has become. The guards stationed near the walls stand motionless, their presence felt more than seen. The Emperor speaks, his voice gentle, shaped by the influence of someone who rarely hears disagreement. He asks about your progress, not with sharpness, but with a calm that feels too careful. His tone glides across the air, giving each word the weight of concern rather than accusation. Yet beneath that calmness lies something taut, a subtle tightening that hints at impatience held politely at bay. You explain your efforts in measured phrases, describing reactions that resist prediction, metals that remain faithful to their nature, mixtures that behave as though immune to persuasion. You choose your words with care, offering neither false hope nor blunt resignation. The Emperor listens with an expression that reveals nothing, though his eyes flicker slightly each time you mention difficulty. When you pause, he leans back in his chair, folding his hands together as though contemplating a delicate puzzle. His silence stretches into a gentle pressure. It is not the silence of disinterest, but the silence of someone weighing the distance between desire and reality, and finding it uncomfortably large. He speaks again, softer now, choosing phrases that seem crafted to soothe. He tells you he understands the challenges. He admits the world does not yield its secrets easily. He even smiles, though the smile is small, thin, a brief curve that does little to warm the air. The softness of his tone is carefully arranged, like silk draped over iron. It disguises the tension, but cannot erase it. You notice how his fingers drum lightly against the arm of his chair. Not impatiently, oh no, he would never allow such a pedestrian display of frustration. It is more delicate than that, more refined, a quiet rhythm that betrays a mind pacing behind the mask of composure. His eyes drift briefly toward the window, as though measuring how long he must wait before certainty graces him. The room feels heavier with each breath. The walls, adorned with intricate tapestries, seem to draw closer. You feel the quiet weight of his expectation settle on your shoulders, not crushing, but insistent, like a hand placed gently yet persistently at your back. You try to remain calm, aware that any tremor in your voice could magnify the tension humming beneath his politeness. He asks you to describe your methods, not in broad strokes, but in precise detail. His attention sharpens with every sentence, his gaze narrowing slightly, as though he is searching for something you may not have realized he expects to find. He interrupts only once, not with irritation, but with a mild curiosity that feels oddly strategic. The question is simple, almost innocent, but the way he asks it, soft voice, steady eyes, makes it clear he is testing not your knowledge, but your certainty. You answer carefully. The guards remain still. The fire crackles. A thin line of sunlight creeps slowly across the floor, marking the passing moments in a quiet, inevitable progression. When he finally nods, the gesture feels more like an evaluation than an agreement. His voice softens further, drifting towards something that could almost be mistaken for kindness. He speaks of trust, of faith in your abilities, of his belief that you possess the insight needed to bring about the marvel he envisions. But each compliment carries a subtle weight, each reassurance edged with the reminder that his patience, while vast, is not without limit. He stands, and the room shifts with him. Even the guards straighten imperceptibly, as though gravity itself obeys his posture. He approaches a table near the hearth, lifting a small ingot of gold between his fingers. The metal glints, catching the firelight in bright flashes. He offers it to you, not as a gift, but as a symbol, a reminder of what he expects, what he believes can be achieved. When you take it, the warmth of the metal surprises you. It feels alive, pulsing faintly in your palm. The Emperor watches your reaction with a quiet, unreadable expression. His eyes drift to the ingot, then back to your face. The silence that follows feels deliberate, as though he is giving you time to understand the message he will not voice directly. He dismisses you with a gentle incline of his head, nothing more. No reprimand, no raised voice, no overt impatience. Yet, as you turn to leave, You feel the tension lingering behind you like a faint scent. Delicate, persistent, unmistakable. The kind of impatience that smiles politely while tightening its grip by degrees too small to notice in the moment. You step back into the corridor, the door closing softly behind you. The air outside feels cooler, though not entirely free. You walk with measured steps, the gold ingot held carefully in your hand. The weight of it feels disproportionate to its size. It carries more than the value of the metal. It carries expectation shaped into form, pressure forged into shine. The guards resume their stillness. The tapestries hang in their quiet grandeur. The castle breathes in the soft rhythm of commerce, study, intrigue, ambition. You move down the hallway, aware of the delicate truth settling in your chest. The most dangerous thing in the Emperor's voice is not what he says, but what he never needs to say aloud. The corridors thin into silence as you leave the upper chambers behind, the weight of expectation loosening just enough for your breath to feel like your own again. A guard nods as you pass, his torch casting a low amber glow that wavers in the cool air. You descend a narrow stairway that spills you into the courtyard, where the night presses close, quiet and observant. A thin mist rolls across the stones, settling into crevices as though the city has sent a piece of itself into the castle grounds. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders and step through the gate. The outside air is sharper, touched with the scent of river dampness and wood smoke. Lanterns burn along the street, each one haloed softly by fog, giving the night an almost deliberate tenderness. You wander with no destination in mind, your steps tapping rhythmically against the cobblestones. The buildings lean inward, the timber frames darkened by years of winter rains and long nights. Their windows glow with thin slivers of light, candles left burning for prayers, for comfort, for company, or perhaps simply for the small reassurance that someone inside refuses to surrender fully to darkness. You follow a lane that leads you toward the river. The Vltava moves with a slow, silvered patience, its surface reflecting distorted torches from bridges overhead. The water murmurs softly, and the sound settles into your bones like a memory you did not know you carried. A fisherman sits by the bank, unmoving, his net coiled beside him. He does not acknowledge you, though his eyes flick toward your shadow as you pass. There is nothing suspicious in the gesture, only the practiced awareness of someone who lives close to the edge of quiet things. You walk on, guided by sense more than by sight, the faint sweetness of crushed berries from a baker's window, the smoky bitterness of a coal brazier, the herbal tang drifting from an apothecary whose shutters remain cracked open even at this hour. Somewhere deeper in the city, a dog barks once, then falls silent. A pair of voices argue in hushed tones behind a half-open door, the conflict muted, worn down by exhaustion rather than anger. The city has seen so many nights like this, nights when ambition quietly rearranges itself, when prayers repeat softly toward an uncertain sky, when the river carries secrets from one district to another with practiced discretion. You feel almost as though Prague is studying you, the streets bending slightly in their quiet attention, the stones holding a memory of every footstep ever placed upon them. The feeling is not threatening, merely sobering. You pause near a small chapel, tucked between a butcher's stall and an empty tavern. A candle burns in the window, casting a faint glow over statues worn smooth by weather and reverence. You listen to the faint hum of a single voice inside, chanting a prayer in a rhythm that suggests tired devotion rather than passionate plea. The words blur together, forming a soft vibration that wraps around the night air. You linger, letting the sounds settle into your mind like distant birdsong. Farther along, the streets widen, and you find yourself in a square where the night opens fully above you. The moon hangs low, its pale light brushing the edges of rooftops and spires. A few merchants are still packing their stalls, their hands moving with the slow determination of people who have worked long hours and will work long hours again tomorrow. One nods at you as he folds a length of cloth into a wooden crate. His face is lined, his eyes deep set, carrying the look of someone who has learned not to expect miracles, only the comfort of familiar effort. You stand in the centre of the square for a moment, feeling the emptiness of the space around you. The quiet is not heavy, but it carries a certain gravity, the kind that comes from centuries of footsteps and the countless stories that have passed through the same worn paths. There is humility in that realization, a reminder that whatever hopes you carry, they exist within a city that has witnessed far more ambitious dreams rise and collapse without leaving a trace. A narrow alley catches your attention, its entrance framed by a wooden archway that sags slightly from age. The shadows there feel different, deeper, more deliberate. You step into the alley, your boots sinking softly into old straw scattered across the stones. The air cools noticeably, and the sounds of the city fade into a muted backdrop. Only the faint clinking of distant metal and the soft rustle of wind remain. The walls on either side rise sharply, their surfaces rough and uneven, patched over the years with plaster that no longer matches the original stone. You run your fingers along the cold surface, feeling the uneven textures. The alley bends sharply, then spills you into a small courtyard lit by a single lantern. A group of older men sits at a wooden table, their faces partly illuminated, partly shadowed. Their conversation is low and steady, the cadence of people who have spent decades discussing the same concerns under the same flickering light. They glance at you briefly, curious but unthreatened, then return to their dialogue. You catch a few words, talk of taxes, of a neighbour's misfortune, of trade ships delayed. Their tones carry neither panic nor triumph, only the durable wisdom of those who have learned the rhythm of uncertainty. You linger at the edge of the courtyard, the lantern casting soft light across your hands. There is comfort in their presence, even if you remain a stranger to them. Their lives anchor the city, threading its nights with continuity. When you leave the courtyard, the alley returns you to a larger street. A soft wind rises, carrying the scent of river water and baked bread. You follow the breeze until the houses thin and the streets stretch toward the hill that overlooks the city. You climb slowly, each step lifting you away from the clustered rooftops, until Prague spreads beneath you like a vast, dark tapestry. Lights glow in scattered constellations, windows, lanterns, reflections on water, torches near the cathedral, the flickering fires of distant workshops. From this height, the city feels ancient and thoughtful. You stand still, letting the enormity of it settle into your chest. Towers rise against the sky like memories carved into stone. The river curves through the city, like an old story repeating itself. The wind tugs gently at your cloak, urging you to understand something unspoken. Your ambitions, however intense, are small compared to the weight of the centuries that rest beneath your feet. And yet the city does not belittle you. It watches, it measures. It recognizes the familiar tremor of someone reaching for brilliance, while standing on ground that has seen brilliance flicker and fade countless times. You feel the quiet recognition between you and the city, an understanding that your work, your hopes, your failures all blend into the larger fabric of human striving. You take a slow breath, letting the night air cool the heat in your lungs. The city's shadows stretch and fold gently, as if adjusting themselves to accommodate whatever comes next. The world below continues in its slow, perpetual movement. Prayers whispered, doors latched, wheels turning on distant carts. As you begin your walk back toward the castle, the streets seem to soften around you. The lanterns burn lower. The river hums quietly in the dark. Your steps align with the city's rhythm, simple and unadorned. The night holds you in its calm, patient embrace. And somewhere in that quiet, Beneath the watchful gaze of Prague's ancient stones, you understand again just how small your ambitions truly are, and how gently the city accepts them anyway. The castle greets you with a softened quiet when you return, its torches burning lower, its hallways cooled by the night air slipping in through narrow windows. Your footsteps echo faintly, carrying the calm weight that settles into the body after wandering streets older than your own ambitions. The doors, the stone, the faint thrum of activity behind distant walls, all of it feels muted now, as though the building itself is exhaling after holding its breath for too many hours. You reach your laboratory without rushing, your hand resting lightly on the door before pushing it open. The familiar scent folds around you. Smoke, old parchment, metals warmed and cooled 100 times, the faint sting of something that never quite leaves the air. You strike a match and light a lantern. Its glow spreads slowly across the room, illuminating the clutter with a gentleness that feels almost affectionate. Your bench waits as it always does, unmoved, unassuming, loyal in its quiet way. The tools are exactly where you left them, mortar and pestle resting together like two objects long resigned to each other. Flasks set at slight angles, the glass cloudy near their necks from repeated heat. A half-used candle leaning in a small brass holder. Nothing spectacular, nothing promising miracles, just the gathered instruments of a life spent in pursuit of something that grows less certain each day. You sit, letting the lantern warm the side of your face. Your hands rest on the table, fingertips brushing the smooth wood. The room feels different tonight. Not heavier, not lighter, just clearer. You sense the subtle shift in yourself before you can name it. A feeling shaped not by defeat, but by gentle recognition. The world has not changed, yet your place within it has softened. You pick up a pair of tongs, their surface cool beneath your fingers. For years, they were extensions of your ambition. Tools meant to coax answers from materials that refused to be persuaded. Tonight, they feel like something else entirely. Companions rather than keys. Witnesses rather than pathways. The distinction is small, but it tempers something inside you. You reach for a small vial of salt. The crystals inside glimmer faintly under the lantern light. You uncork the vial, letting the scent drift upward. Earthy, metallic, unremarkable. You pour a little into your palm, feeling the weight of each grain. Not heavy, not transformative, just honest. You let the salt fall slowly back into the vial, watching the tiny cascade settle into its container with the quiet finality of sand in an hourglass. The simplicity of the moment soothes you. There was a time when you would have viewed this substance with a restless hunger, convinced that some hidden property might reveal itself if you studied it long enough. Now you see only what it is, a small collection of crystals doing their best to exist within the limits of their nature. The realization comes gently, and because of that, it settles deeper. Some things remain what they are, no matter how much heat you apply, how many hours you surrender, or how fervently you believe in the possibility of change. Your eyes travel across the room, shelves crowded with failed attempts, tiny lumps of cooled metal, discolored mixtures sealed in wax, dried herbs that no longer carry the fragrance they once promised. The remnants of experiments that once felt urgent now appear almost peaceful in their stillness. They aren't accusations. They aren't reminders of insufficiency. They are simply markers of the path you walked to reach this understanding. You lean back, exhaling slowly. The air feels easier to breathe. Somewhere deep within the castle, a door closes softly. The sound carried to you like a fading echo. The night stillness deepens. You feel the quiet seep into your bones in a way that feels earned. It is not resignation, it is clarity. You take up your notebook and flip through its pages. You see line after line of meticulous description, equations written with hopeful precision, annotations searching for significance. The ink shifts in tone from dark and assertive to lighter strokes made on nights when exhaustion softened your hand. You linger on a page that contains a drawing of an apparatus you once believed would solve everything. Its lines are sharp, deliberate, hopeful. You trace the outline lightly, feeling neither embarrassment nor longing, only a tender acknowledgement of who you were when you drew it. You close the notebook with a soft thud. The lantern flickers, shadows stretching across the floor like long, thoughtful sighs. You rise and move to the furnace. Its iron frame is cool, resting in the pause between demands. You run your hand along its surface. It has been both adversary and companion. Its fire, a teacher of truths you were not always prepared to hear. Tonight, it feels almost kind. You open the grate and place a small piece of charcoal inside, not to rekindle the flame, but simply to hold it, a gesture without purpose, and yet somehow meaningful. The room responds with a subtle warmth. You return to the bench and lift a beaker, turning it under the lantern light. The glass catches the glow in soft arcs. You study the imperfections, tiny scratches, a faint crack near the rim. You've replaced many tools within these walls, but you kept this one, not because it was the most useful, but because it survived more experiments than it should have. Its resilience mirrors your own in a quiet, unobtrusive way. You set the beaker down gently, letting your hands rest on the bench again. The peace you feel grows slowly, like a tide reaching shore without hurry. It washes over the edges of your thoughts, smoothing the sharpness that usually follows failure. You realize that the pressure weighing on you has never come from the metals or mixtures. It has come from the belief that transformation must always be forced, that brilliance must always be wrestled from the world through sheer effort. But some transformations belong to stories, not to the stubborn matter before you. Some changes exist only in the imagination of rulers, not in the quiet truth of elements. And some ambitions, when examined in the soft light of an honest night, simply ask to be released. You breathe in the cool air of the room, letting it anchor you. The weight of impossible expectation loosens, thread by thread. You are not lesser for reaching your limits. You are merely human. The room seems to accept this with you, settling into a silence that feels companionable rather than empty. You extinguish the lantern, plunging the room into darkness, softened only by the moon's thin glow through the window. The tools fade into silhouettes. The bench becomes a quiet shape in the night. The furnace sighs quietly, as if settling into sleep. You stand for a final moment, feeling the contours of the space around you, familiar and forgiving. Then you step into the corridor, closing the door behind you with a softness that mirrors your own. The castle breathes around you, stone, air, shadow, memory, and for the first time in a long while, you walk without the weight of trying to turn the world into something it has no intention of becoming. The corridor feels softer beneath your feet as you move through it, as though the stones themselves sense the quiet shift taking place inside you. A faint draft wanders along the walls, carrying with it the coolness of early morning and the muted promise of dawn. You follow it without thinking, guided more by the gentle pull of air than by destination. Your body knows the way even before your thoughts settle into direction. When you reach the outer gate, the last traces of night linger in thin streaks across the sky, their darkness stretched and diluted into pale blue. The guards stand at their posts, their armour dulled by the hour. One of them nods to you and steps aside, his movement slow, ceremonial, in its restraint as you cross beneath the archway, and the world opens into the spacious breath of early light. The air outside is sharper than you expect. It fills your lungs with a clean coldness that pushes out the remnants of smoke and metallic scent clinging to you from countless nights. You inhale again, deeper this time, feeling something in your chest loosen in response. The dawn wind brushes across your face like a quiet absolution, and for a moment it feels as if the city is gently telling you that the burden you've carried, does not have to be yours forever. The cobblestones glisten faintly with dew. You walk slowly across them, your pace unhurried, savouring the rare stillness of Prague before the morning wakes fully. The rooftops rise in silhouette against the brightening sky, each angle softened by the light's early gentleness. Smoke begins to thin from a few chimneys, thin trails that curl upward, as if reluctant to break the moment's tranquility. You pause on a small bridge overlooking the river. The Vltava moves with the patience of something ancient, its surface catching the sky's pale gold as the sun edges upward. The water looks almost thoughtful, carrying reflections of towers and chimneys in elongated streaks that shift with the current. You rest your hands on the rail, the wood cool and slightly damp beneath your palms. For a long time, your days began within the walls behind you. They rose and fell according to the furnace's demands, the ruler's hopes, the quiet competition of men who wrapped their ambition in elegant theories. But now, in the early morning calm, those demands seem as distant as the last stars fading from the sky. You feel the absence of pressure, like a slow exhale, a release so subtle that you hardly notice it until the weight no longer sits at the base of your skull. The city hums gently as it wakes. You hear the first calls of vendors preparing their carts, the dull clatter of buckets at a well, the steady footsteps of a miller beginning his route, ordinary sounds, grounded and sincere. They carry none of the shimmering illusions of the court, no alchemical promises, no whispered theories, no gilded expectations disguised as opportunity. You let the simplicity settle into you, a relief that arrives without fanfare. Your thoughts drift back to the furnace, its iron frame, its obedient heat, its stubborn refusal to bend the world into miracles. For years you believed its flame held the threshold between obscurity and brilliance. Tonight, that idea feels strangely distant, softened by the understanding that you were the one holding a promise too tightly to see clearly. The furnace simply did what furnaces do. It burned, it glowed, it consumed. It was your longing that imagined it capable of more. You step away from the bridge and follow a narrow street lined with shuttered stalls. The air smells faintly of bread left to rise overnight, of damp earth, and of the faint sweetness that lingers after a long dark. A cat slips across your path, glancing at you with disinterested ease before stretching and disappearing beneath a stairway. The simplicity of the moment steadies your breath. You continue walking until the street opens into a small square. A stone fountain sits at its centre, its basin quiet, its water barely stirring. You take a seat on the edge, letting the cold stone seep into your bones. The stillness around you feels deliberate, like a pause the city has offered to those who arrive at such quiet hours, seeking clarity. And clarity does come, not like a sudden revelation, but as a slow recognition, a soft culmination of everything you've carried and questioned. The pursuit that once animated your spirit now feels like a tapestry you've stepped far enough away from to finally see its frayed edges. You understand that some ambitions remain beautiful precisely because they are unreachable. They inspire, they enchant, they pull you forward, but they are not meant to be held. The sun edges fully above the horizon, its light spilling gently across the square. The sky warms into shades of pale gold and muted pink. You close your eyes, letting the light rest on your face. It washes over you without expectation, without judgment, a warmth that asks nothing in return. You think of the long nights spent deciphering mixtures, the hours bent over glass and metal, the scent of Mercury clinging to your clothes, your hair, your breath. You recall the quiet disappointment hidden in polished words spoken by those who wanted brilliance more than truth. You remember the weight of ambition that was never truly yours but borrowed from the hopes of others. And yet, standing here in the morning light, you feel no resentment, only the soft ache of having reached for something vast, and the gentler peace of no longer needing to chase it. You rise from the fountain and walk again, your steps guided by calm rather than purpose. The streets fill slowly with life. Bakers begin setting out their breads, children run through alleys chasing invisible prey. A man sweeps dust from a doorway with the resigned grace of someone who has repeated the motion 1,000 times. Their world is here, on these stones, under this sky, a world where expectation grows at a human pace, slowly, humbly, honestly. You turn your gaze toward the castle on the hill. Its towers catch the morning light, their silhouettes brightening as the sun climbs. It stands exactly as it always has, proud, watchful, certain of its grandeur. Yet something in its presence feels less absolute now, less imposing. The distance between you and it is no longer only physical. There is space in you now that it no longer occupies. You breathe deeply, filling your lungs with the crisp air. For the first time, the breath feels entirely your own. You walk onward, the road unfurling beneath your feet. Each step carries a quiet decision, a gentle unwinding of the ties that once held you close to promises you can finally step away from. The sun rises higher, Prague awakens fully. The day stretches before you, unburdened, honest, wide, and as you follow the curve of the street toward the river, toward the life waiting beyond the castle's expectations, the truth settles in you with a warmth that outshines any furnace. You never needed gold, you never needed fame. You only needed permission to stop trying to turn the world into something it was never meant to become, and permission to walk away from a dream that was never truly yours. Now that permission rests firmly in your hands. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S., Rich Davis, and Leslie Schofield. Sleep well.